And I am so happy that we have Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar with us. Please give them a warm Virginia welcome. Thank you.
Please welcome from Minnesota, United States Senator and presidential candidate, Amy Klobuchar.
Wow! Thank you! What an amazing crowd! Hello, Virginia Democrats! Are you ready to beat Donald Trump? Are you ready to get rid of Betsy DeVos? Are you ready to paint your legislature blue? I am so honored to be here tonight with all of these incredible leaders. Susan and Chris, thank you so much. Your great governor, former Governor Terry McAuliffe out there, thank you. Your incredible Democratic congressional delegation, including not one, not two, but 3 women who flipped Republican seats. Your senators, who are 2 of my closest friends in the United States Senate, and I'm not just saying that because they aren't running for president. I will start with Tim Kaine. There is a lot to love about Tim Kaine. His honesty, his faith, his willingness to stand up against the president and say clearly that it is Congress that decides if you go to war, not Donald Trump. And Mark Warner. Mark and I have a lot in common, as you know. Mark made a fortune building an empire with cell phones. I own a cell phone. Mark set a Senate record by raising $12 million in 1 year because he knew he could paint that seat blue for the Senate. I set a Senate record 1 year by raising $17,000 from ex-boyfriends. I did that. As my husband John, who is here, points out, it is not an expanding base. But Mark is, in fact, a true sayer in the Senate. He is when he is talking about the economy, and we are so fortunate to have him as ranking member of the Intelligence Committee at a time when we need him there. He is someone that took on something that no one was talking about a year and a half ago, and he literally is the one that stood up and said, these guys, a foreign entity, Russia tried to steal our democracy, and they're not going to do it again. Virginia Democrats, you must make sure he wins his next election. So some of you may have seen my announcement for president in the middle of a Minnesota blizzard. Well, I had like 4 inches of snow on my head, right? People were skiing in, people were sledding in, and after I announced, the president sent out a tweet. And he made fun of me for talking about climate change in the middle of a snowstorm. And he called me Snow Woman. So I wrote back, Donald Trump, the science of climate change is on my side, and I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard. I announced by that river for a reason, and that is that I wanted to make the point that it is time to cross the river of our divides to get to a higher plane in our politics. We have a president that literally wakes up every morning and tweets something to fracture our communities, right? He goes after immigrants. He goes after people of color. He goes after people in his own party when they don't agree with him. And he goes after people in our party every single day, including sending out doctored videos, which is our biggest fear in this democracy, and he doesn't care at all. So I will tell you this, Virginia Democrats, we need to take back our country, and we need to make this the country that we have built that we are so proud of, starting right here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We need to put the heart back in our politics. So, my background is a little bit different than Donald Trump. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines in Ely, Minnesota. He never graduated from high school, but he saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to college. And my dad went to a 2-year community college. My mom, she grew up in Wisconsin. She moved to Minnesota and she taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. She was a proud union member. And I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, as the daughter of a union teacher and a union newspaper man, as the first woman elected to the United States Senate from the state of Minnesota and a candidate for President of the United States. That is what this country is about, that no matter where you come from, no matter who you know, no matter how much money you have, no matter what you look like, no matter if you worship in one place or another or who you love, that you can make it in the United States of America, because this is a country of shared dreams and shared prosperity. That's what this is. You have a state that understands that community. You understand what happens when disaster strikes, what happens with Hurricane Isabel, what happened with the tragedy at Virginia Tech and the horrific recent tragedy at Virginia Beach. You know what happens. That's when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Well, I announced by that river because it was 1.5 miles from where that bridge fell down in the middle of a beautiful summer day. And what did the world see just like they saw when they looked at your state? They saw in my state an off-duty firefighter who tethered herself to the side of the river and dove in and out looking for survivors in those mangled cars and trucks. They saw a tasty truck. The guy could have saved his life by ramming in the back of a school bus, but instead he veered off and he burned to death in his cab. They saw a school bus that plummeted 30 feet and was hanging on a guardrail when a school bus counselor named Hernandez, who could have just jumped off the back of that bus, he got every one of those kids off that bus to safety. That is community. That is community. So what is this community and this shared prosperity about? Well, it is about ensuring that all our families have a fair shot, that you should be able to afford college if you work hard. You should be able to afford prescription drugs. You should be able to have health care and get a good job. But as we know, that is not the case for so many Americans, but it can be. I remember one struggling worker who told me a few years ago that she had always thought that the words "restore the middle class" were nothing but a political bumper sticker. Then her husband lost his job, and she had to start working multiple jobs, trying to pay for their car and their house, and that's when she saw the words "restore the middle class" as nothing but a prayer. Virginia Democrats, we need to make restore the middle class more than a bumper sticker, more than a prayer. We need to make the words "restore the middle class" a reality for every American, regardless of where they live or what they look like. Shared prosperity means tearing down barriers to success. Racism and sexism persist in this country. We see it in the schoolyards and in the boardrooms. We hear it shouted at white nationalist riots like the tragedy in Charlottesville. We hear it from presidential podiums. We see it when the vice president of a Fortune 500 company in my state goes shopping at a department store. She's African American. She gets followed by store security. We see it when a pregnant woman in New Orleans tells her doctor about swelling in her hands, and he doesn't listen. She's in the maternity room. She loses her baby. We see it every time a black woman takes home 61 cents for every dollar a white man makes. These are barriers that this president does not care about, but these are barriers that the Democratic Party will break down. Democrats, we must take on child poverty. As Tim Kaine has said, fighting poverty, it's a growth strategy. It's a competitive strategy, but it is also a moral responsibility. Today, 15 million children in America are living in poverty. There are children who fall asleep at their desks because they can't get a good night's sleep when they don't have a bed or a home. There are children who think that college or a job are for other people, luckier people. Virginia Democrats, we can do this. We can cut child poverty in half in 10 years and end child poverty in a generation. We can do it. We can do it by expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Care Tax Credit, and SNAP benefits, and by overhauling our country's housing policy. We can do this. And let's be clear, you cannot have a fair shot in America if you don't have health care. We must move to universal health care, and we must take on the pharmaceutical companies. They have 2 lobbyists for every member of Congress. And you wonder why the price of insulin has gone from $18 a vial to $1,200 a month. And you wonder why EpiPen shot up in price. It's because of monopoly power. It's because of the pharmaceutical power. And I can tell you this, they think they own Washington, but they don't own me. And then when it comes to women's health, Virginia, your state, you understand this. You understand that you do not want to be another Georgia with what they did. 73% of Americans stand with you. They do not want to overturn Roe v. Wade. They do not want to do that. And one last thing I want to mention when it comes to health. I have put forward a plan for addiction and mental health. For me, it comes from the heart. My dad struggled with alcoholism my whole life growing up. He had 3 DWIs. And when he got his 3rd DWI, he had a choice. He was either going to go to jail or he was going to go to treatment. He picked treatment. And in his words, with his family and his faith and the help that he was given, he was pursued by grace. And I believe that 1 out of 5 Americans who struggle with a mental illness, that 1 out of 2 Americans who have addiction in their close family or in their friends, that those people also deserve that chance to be pursued by grace. You in Virginia have taken this seriously, inspired by the work of Cray Deeds on this issue. And I want to expand that treatment so that we have beds for people that need it, so that we have counseling for kids that need help, and so that we take this on as the public health crisis that it is. But you know what, Virginians? There is one thing that people haven't talked as much about tonight that we need to talk about, and that is climate change. We have the council member here from Norfolk. We have the council member from Norfolk, and I have seen what's happening there. Well, it is happening all over the country. This is no longer happening in 100 years. It is happening now. And I can tell you, as your president, on day 1, I will sign us back into the International Climate Change Agreement. And I will then bring back the Obama clean power rules that are on the cutting room floor and those gas mileage standards, and introduce sweeping legislation to take this on. And this is no longer just an issue on the coast. In fact, a candidate from the heartland who has seen the floods, who has seen the tornadoes, who has seen the wildfires, is the one, in fact, to take this on. But none of this, whether it is immigration reform, whether it is taking on climate change, health care, taking on children's poverty, none of this will get done unless we protect our democracy. Everything depends on that. You want to take on the NRA? Well, then we've got to get the dark money out of our politics. You did that in Virginia, but we cannot do it in Washington because they are paralyzed by the power of the NRA. We are literally losing a classroom of young people every week, and that is wrong. So we must not just take state action when it comes to guns, we must take federal action. So how do we take back our democracy? Well, I've got an idea about how we can start. We can pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and get the dark money out of our politics. We can do that. End the partisan gerrymandering. Stop discrimination at the ballot box by restoring the Voting Rights Act. And yes, it is finally time to pass my bill to register every eligible young person to vote when they turn 18 years old. This is the time to do it. Now, we have some debates coming up, right? And Mayor Pete and I are looking very forward to them. It's going to be a lot of fun. But you are going to see, in that moment, you're going to see that what unifies our party is more important than what divides us, right? Because the most important thing that we can do in this election in 2020 is what? Win, right? We must win this election. And I can tell you this, I have never lost one race I've ever run. I have won in every congressional district in my state every single time, including districts that Donald Trump won by more than 20 points. Why? Because I don't see that rural-urban divide. I go every place, everywhere, every time. That is how we win. We don't write off states, and we don't write off areas of our country. That is how we win. So, Virginia Democrats, I want to end with this. We are on a march. And that march started the day after Donald Trump was sworn into office. You remember that day. You remember that day. You remember that day because millions of Americans peacefully marched all over this country, including right here in Richmond. You remember that day. What happened 9 days later? 9 days later, when that anti-Muslim refugee ban order came out, people spontaneously showed up at airports across the United States. They showed up at non-international airports. They did that. You fast forward to day 100, my favorite march, the March for Science, with my favorite sign. What do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. You go to the summer when the fighting 48 Democrats, every one of us stood up in the Senate and stopped the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, President Obama's signature legislation. We did that. You go into that fall, and in this moment where no one thought it was possible, it was 2 states. The state of New Jersey, where, by the way, a legislator who said the day of the Women's March, I hope they'll be home in time to make dinner. That guy lost. He was beaten by an African-American woman. That happened. And what happened here in the state of Virginia, it was an unbelievable victory. You might have barely started that job that you're going to finish this fall, but you elected the most diverse group of people you have ever seen in the Virginia legislature. You did that. People that stood up and won. And then, after that, in this incredible victory for decency and dignity Doug Jones won in the state of Alabama. That is the march that we are on. Then, going in after that, what happened? Those Parkland students marched. They marched, but they didn't just march, they voted. And that takes us to the last elections, where you sent us those 3 incredible women, where we finally turned the House of Representatives back into the People's House of Representatives once again. That is the march we are on, and it will end in 2020. And so if any moment that you think that you can't stand another one of these tweets or one of these stories, or a president that goes over on foreign soil and calls the mayor of London a stone-cold loser and the Duchess nasty, and goes after an American company and calls for a boycott on foreign soil, that all happened in 24 hours. But if you see those things and you just say, I can't deal with this anymore, and you go home, we can't win. We win when you finish the march. You are the welders that have shortened the arc of justice. Let's get it done. Let's win in 2020. Thank you, Virginia Democrats. Thank you.